Setting up mountain bike suspension can seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's actually fairly simple to get good base settings. Today, I'm going to show you how to set up your mountain bike suspension in 10 minutes, every time. One of the things that can seem so hard about setting up suspension is the fact there's a lot of different adjustments available to you on virtually every modern suspension design. So we've teamed up with Suntour to make this video, and they've given us a brand new fork and a brand new shock, and they've fitted them to my bike. Now, I've never set up Suntour before, so I'm going to do that right now to show you just how easy that process can be. There are three main adjustments you need to make to your suspension in order to get it ready for off-road riding. There's the sag, there's the compression, and there's the rebound. The sag refers to the amount the suspension moves under your body weight when you sit on the bike. The reason you need sag is so the wheels can track the contours of the ground. When the wheels are on the ground, you have traction and control. Compression refers to the amount of damping applied to the shock absorbers under the compression. The reason you need this is to slow that movement down and to absorb impacts. Rebound refers to the way the damping forces are applied to the shock absorbers when they return following a compression. Now, before we get started, it's a good idea to get to know your equipment and know where you can find those adjustments. We'll start by having a quick look at the suspension fork. So this fork is Suntour's Duralux. It's a 160mm fork. Like most suspension forks at the moment, it's air sprung. Now, the air spring is accessible by cap on the top of the left-hand leg here. That's a pretty common position on most brands, although you might find on your bike it has it on the right leg instead. There's typically a little cap, you unscrew it, and there's a Schrader valve underneath. This is the same type of valve that you'll find on your car tyres. Next up are the compression and rebound adjustments. Compression is always blue and rebound is always red. Compression is normally found on the top of the leg and rebound at the bottom of the leg. As far as actually adjusting the damping goes, clockwise adds more and anti-clockwise or counterclockwise takes it away. There are typically two types of compression adjustment available on forks. There are those with a multi-position lever or those like this one that has a dial. Now, out back I have the Suntour Tri-Air shock. This has 3 points of adjustment. It has air, compression and rebound. Again, the compression is a blue lever here and rebound is a red dial. Now, this particular shock has 55mm of travel, which at the rear wheel that translates to 150mm. Now, just before we get started, it's important to say, make sure your compression adjustments are fully unwound or fully open, and make sure that the rebound is backed off. You don't want any of this damping to affect the sag setup. We're going to start by looking at the rear sag. Now, find yourself somewhere away from traffic, fairly flat, that you can repeat this process nice and easily. Car park will be fine, a section of fire road like this, anything nice and simple. Now, the general rule of thumb is between 20 and 30% of the available travel you set up as sag. Now, this can vary on some bike designs out back and of course with rider preferences. Some people prefer it slightly softer and some will like it slightly harder. On this particular shock, there's 55mm of shock movement. So between 20 and 30% equates to 11 to 16.5mm. Now, you set the sag by inflating the shock with a shock pump at the Schrader valve that's based at the top of the shock. And you measure the sag by pushing the O-ring up against the seal and sitting on the bike to see where it pushes it to. And whatever that amount of space is, measure it with your trusty tape measure, and that's how you can work out if it's the correct sag or not for your body weight. So you get the O-ring, push it up to the seal on the shock, then you're going to sit on the bike and bounce up and down a bit just to let it settle. So you're basically taking your weight off the floor so your weight is on the bike. Once settled, push that O-ring back up again, move the O-ring up against that shaft and carefully dismount, try not to disturb it too much. And then quite simply, where the O-ring is, that's how much sag you have. Now, like I said, I'm looking for between 11 and 16.5mm. So at the moment, there's 18mm, so it's a touch too soft for me. So now's the time to get the shock pump out and make some adjustments. Now, something that's really important to say is when you disconnect the pump, depending on which type of shock pump you have, you may lose a tiny bit of air, and it's something you need to factor in when you're actually inflating it in the first place. You might need to go slightly firmer, put a few more pounds in there just to compensate for that. Again, push the O-ring up to the seal, sit on the bike, let it sort of settle a bit. Okay, so it's about there, and then carefully climb off again and measure once more. Now, in an ideal situation, you would lean up on someone to do this, or perhaps against a workbench or similar, but you can do it like this out on the trail. If you get over the bike, you have one pedal down, put all your body weight on that pedal, lean over the front of the bike, and then your O-ring will move. You will compress that fork. Note that I'm on a slight uphill here, so it's not going to make me roll anywhere. And that's a pretty good indication of my body weight on the front of the bike. So I'll take the tape measure out and I'll measure this. At the moment here, we are 45 millimeters of sag. Now, I actually prefer my front end a little firmer, so I'm just going to put a little bit more air in here. So there we go, that is the sag at the rear and the sag at the front setup. All we need to do now is get some good base settings for our rebound and our compression, and we're good to hit the trails. Okay, now it's on to the rebound control. Now this controls the extension or the extending of the fork and the shock following a hit. Now this has quite an important effect on the handling of the bike. If you have too little rebound damping in place, the bike can feel very bouncy, quite like pogo stick-ish, and it can feel quite uncontrolled. If you have too much damping though, then it's going to feel quite harsh because the fork and the shock won't extend fully before the next impact. Now that's something known as packing down. Now what you're looking for when you're setting up your rebound is it to be as fast as possible without packing down. Now before we adjust the rebound, it's important to say that the heavier a rider you are, the more air pressure you're going to have in your forks and shocks, and therefore the more rebound damping you're going to have to control it. So what I might have on this bike won't necessarily be the same as what you will have on your own bike. What you're looking for is a nice fast performance. You don't want it so fast it feels out of control and kicks you, and you don't want it so slow that it sticks down after repeated hits. On this shock, there's 9 clicks of rebound, so I'm going to start by having 4 clicks from fully open, and then we're going to work it out from there. Now, there's a couple of things to bear in mind with this, is that if you have a new bike and you're setting up for the first time, the back end of your bike won't necessarily be as smooth as it will be after a few rides. The shock bushings, they will tend to wear in slightly and be slightly smoother after the first few rides, so you might still need to increase the amount of rebound once you've initially set it up. A good way to check, make sure you're in the right ballpark, is to set your O-ring against the shock seal again, ride off an obstacle about curb-sized and remain seated in the saddle. Now if it's too slow, it will just return back to the sag point. If it's too fast, it will bounce around, and if it's about right, it will go past the sag point a little bit and then just settle. That's really what you're looking for a good base setting. And for the front forks, a good way to get the same sort of base setting is to return that O-ring to the fork seal, and with just the palms of your hands rested on top of the handlebars, you want to compress the fork to about your sag point and then release as fast as you can. And what you're looking for is the wheel to not come off the ground. If it's too fast, the wheel can come off the ground, and if it's too slow, you will know about that. So literally just this process. Now on most suspension forks, you'll have a single red adjuster on the bottom, just for adjusting that rebound. On this particular fork, the Duralux by Suntour, there's 2. There's one for high speed and there's one for low speed. What they recommend doing is running the high speed all the way in and just making the adjustment with the low speed to find your base setting. But don't forget, these are base settings. This is where you start figuring out how your bike reacts to off-road terrain. You start with a good base setting, then you go and ride and learn your bike, learn the trails. As you get to know your bike and you get to know your suspension fork and shock a bit better, you're going to make some revisions to your setup. Now the last adjustment you need to make for your base settings is compression. In this case, we're looking at the shock, and you have a lever here. Now this controls the low speed compression. Now most people refer to open, mid and closed as the typical settings, but what this actually refers to is the amount of damping you're getting from the shock. In fully open, you're actually getting about 20% damping. When it's on the midway, about 60, and then about 80 when it's fully closed. Now this doesn't mean it's locked out, but what this means is you're getting the maximum low speed compression. So it makes the bike a bit more efficient when you're climbing, so it's not going to move around too much under your body weight. Very effective to have. Now you're probably going to find for riding most stuff, you'll be on the mid setting. And then if you want extreme comfort or lots of traction, you can have it on fully open. You only really want to engage the fully closed section when you're on perhaps climbing a fire road or even for urban riding. Now the same thing applies to your fork if you have one of those multi-position levers, but this one has two dials on here. It has high speed and low speed. Now if your fork has high and low, start by fully opening the high speed. Leave that one alone for the time being. That is something you'll learn as you start riding a bit more and you understand the characteristics. The low speed is the one you need to make your initial adjustments to get your good base setting. So what you want to do is figure out how many clicks it's got and go in for about a third of those clicks. Well, there we go. That is how you set your suspension up in 10 minutes with sag, compression and rebound. All you've got to do now is go and hit those trails and get to know your bike. Don't forget, these are just the basics that you can do to get a good base setting for your suspension. As your riding improves and you start to learn your bike a bit more, naturally you're going to make some improvements and some incremental changes. If you're into jumping, you might want to add some more rebound to slow the bike down and make it feel a bit more controlled and predictable. If you're into your downhill racing and riding, you might want to experiment with high-speed compression to really take out those massive hits. And of course, if you also like jumping and you want the bike to ramp towards the end of its travel rather than having a more linear feel, you can experiment with ramp control by adding air volume spacers in the forks and in the shock. All stuff that we're going to get into in our next suspension video. If you want to see Suntool forks being used in a very different video, click down here to see Blake absolutely smashing it on the Surrey Hills with Suntool Polygon rider Sam Reynolds. As always, if you love what we do here at GMBN Tech, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to share and subscribe.